Thank you so much, Sarah. So just a little bit about me. I'm the founding executive director of a nonprofit that went from an all-volunteer organization with about $10,000 in seed money to a 10-year nonprofit that runs at around $750,000 a year, has 14 staff, stuff like that. So it's a long process, right, where you're trying to grow your capacity, build a board, and raise a lot of money so that you can build a lot of sustainability into how you do your work. So pivotal to that work is funding from foundations. And I know that California Relief is a pass-through granting of government funds. I believe you guys also maybe take on some foundation funds, but for small grassroots nonprofits, foundation funding is super, super important. But there are a variety of foundations out there, from corporate foundations to community foundations to private family foundations as well. And so just to key up a little bit of a sort of like what giving looks like as a whole, this is according to the National Philanthropic Trust, that in 2018, this is 2018 data, individual private donors contributed $427 billion to nonprofits and charities. That includes churches. Corporate foundations contributed $20 billion to nonprofits and charities. And foundations contributed $75 billion. I have found foundations to be easier to work with, that you can really build strategic partnerships with program officers there, and if they have donor advised funds, which we'll talk about. And so foundations are a really good way for you to raise money for your cause, and also to leverage more so some of the government grants or California Relief grants that you get as well. Kind of sort of putting those two partnerships together is a dynamic formula for getting more money and resources in the door. So today we have our panelists, and we're joined by Francisco Castillo. Is he here? Let's see if we can find him. I guess when you talk, Francisco, you want to say hi? It'll pop over to your video.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, there you are. Good to see your face. Thanks for being here.
Good to see you. Thank you.
Francisco comes to us as the Senior Director of Public Affairs for Union Pacific Railroad. And I know that he's been a really great funding partner in the Sacramento region for us as well. Today, we're also joined by Dr. Neva Floor. Neva, can you say hi?
Hi, how are you?
Thank you. I love seeing your face. And Neva is the Chief Impact and Strategy Officer for the Sacramento Community Region Foundation. And I know that many of you are not located in Sacramento, but I am sure that there is a community region foundation that works in your area. So she'll be speaking a little bit about how a community foundation operates. And then I'm also joined by Michael Spurgeon. Michael, can you say hi?
Hi, everybody.
Great, awesome. Michael is the vice president on the board of directors for a family foundation called the Albert and Elaine Borchard Foundation. And they are rooted in Southern California, but they fund all throughout the state and sometimes internationally. And they are also committed to the environment as well. And they operate differently. So you have 3 foundation panelists here with sort of each a different focus, but they are under the umbrella of foundations. So first of all, I want to do a poll for those on the call. And the poll question is, how many of you have received foundation funding from a corporate foundation, a regional community foundation, or a family foundation, or other, or if you've never received foundation funding? And then how does your organization identify foundation funding opportunities, whether that's through just a search engine or through some sort of grant software identification program or website? So we'll see when we get that back. But I think first what I want to get started is I'll sort of have each of you introduce yourself for just a couple minutes about what your sort of focus is, and what, how maybe like what your foundation focuses on, or what might make it different than other foundations out there. And we'll start with Francisco, and then we'll go to Neva, and then we'll go to Michael.
Sure. Thanks for having me. I decided to do something different aside from my normal work. So good to see all of you. So our foundation, a few years ago, we actually hired a national nonprofit or organization, Changing Our World, to pretty much restructure Union Pacific's foundation, because what we found was that there was an appetite for focus that clearly and closely aligned to the business of Union Pacific, that told our story, that reinforces the brand. And so we came up with 3 different pillars after a 1.5-year review of our foundation and what we should focus on. And those pillars include 3, and they're pretty straightforward. One of them is community spaces. And I can go more into what those mean and questions that you guys may have. Community spaces, public safety, and workforce development. And those 3, we pretty much left broad enough to be able to let the nonprofit organization define what that means to them. As long as it is aligned with one of those pillars is something that we would consider. And then we have a 4th pillar that's more focused on local community needs. For example, shelters or food banks, those kind of nonprofits that rely on some funding to help kind of with food distributions. And those are really our 3 main focus pillars that resulted after a 1-year-long process of restructuring our foundation, because what we found was that before, everyone can apply for a grant, right? I mean, you had from the smallest to the largest, we had city, local municipalities that were applying for foundation grants, and we really didn't have a filter of which ones to prioritize over another. And so this really created a focus for us, and we've been able to successfully fund many programs throughout our 23-state network, and particularly here in California, over $100 million a year that we fund for state nonprofits.
That's awesome. Real quick, Francisco, I also love that your company took the time to focus its giving on also its branding and purpose, because I hate catch-all foundations. That's like, we fund everything. Well, you're just wasting everybody's time on both ends by doing that. What's the average size grant that you might give out to like a grassroots nonprofit, maybe under $500,000?
Sure. We give our foundation grants range from $2,500 to $25,000. And that really, that's the range. And then we have another key partnership program that's much larger grants for bigger projects in our territories. And those can range between 100 to 300,000. It just really depends on what those key partnerships look like. And there's a whole different guidelines for those specific partnerships, but our foundation on an annual basis is between 2,500 to 25,000.
That's great. Thank you. And Neva, how's a community foundation work?
Okay, well, I'll give you the short version and just say a little bit about the Sacramento Region Community Foundation. So we are the local community foundation serving the greater Sacramento region, which includes 4 counties, El Dorado, Placer, Yolo, and Sacramento County. In terms of what differentiates us, I guess from other foundations, is that we are a community foundation, which means that we are classified by the IRS as a public charity, and we're primarily funded by public dollars, which could include donations from individuals or families, businesses, sometimes other philanthropic partners, and government grants. But I'd say that foundations and community foundations in particular hold a very unique vantage point in that we generally focus on a region, right? And for us, we can serve as an on-ramp for philanthropy, for donors, both large and small, who really want to give to their communities in ways that are meaningful to them, that may be enduring beyond their lifetime even, or even granting when they're still with us. And we help to manage those resources and investments, and then create community impact by driving those dollars into communities where we believe we can sustain the greatest change for our community. Very similar to is it Francisco? Sorry. Okay. We also stood up strategic initiatives based on what we heard from the community. So a little over 5 years ago, we set out to do a series of community listening sessions and focus groups to understand what our community wanted from us. And by that, we were able to settle on 4 strategic areas of focus, which include food access and food system work, the creative economy, education, so expanding opportunities for higher ed for students of color and students who have been historically shut out from educational attainment in college and completion, as well as expanding philanthropy. And probably one of our most largest known flagship programs is our Big Day of Giving program, where we work with over 600 nonprofits throughout the year to provide capacity building, support, technical assistance, but then most importantly, a 24-hour giving day where nonprofits from across the region are able to generate critical unrestricted dollars that will support their organizations and their to be able to expand on their services throughout the year. And Katie knows very well how critical that program has become this year. Certainly we were just amazed at the generosity of our region and how our community stood in and leaned into the moment. And so I'll just say, just to end this section, that I think it's what's also really important to us, and I think another unique role that community foundations can play is just being accountable, right, to the communities that we serve, not just by way of the donations that we receive, but also the grants that are being given out in the community, and mindful of certainly where equity needs to play into that. And is where, and I think a unique opportunity that community foundations can provide is to call community in to be a part of decision-making processes. And so we're very committed to having peer-led grant review committees that do incorporate the voices of community members who are proximate to the issues that we are working on. And so, yeah, maybe I'll stop there.
That's awesome. So real quick, we did have our Big Day of Giving last week. So it's a 24-hour fundraising challenge for nonprofits. And the region raised almost $12 million in 24 hours. That was amazing. Neva, what did you anticipate with COVID-19? What number did you think that the foundation would get to?
Yeah, we kind of put a bet on that.
Yeah?
Yeah, I mean, I think we were very, very mindful. I will say this, we very early on in the process, certainly soon after the pandemic hit, we went through a series of conversations on whether we should do Big Day of Giving, whether we should not do Big Day of Giving, just again, mindful of the complexity of the moment, and also mindful that many of our organizations were, we're on the front lines, doing what nonprofits do so well, which is organizing, getting resources out to the communities to ensure that they were safe and strong during this time. And we were just mindful of capacity. But as we talked through it, it became more and more clear to us that it absolutely had to happen, because we knew that with a number of our nonprofits having to cancel fundraising events and revenue generating programs, and those who are working in schools, and contracts that are being canceled. I mean, we just knew that getting those unrestricted dollars to nonprofits was the moment that we needed to lean into. And so we started to very early on amplify that message to our donors, encouraging them, if they had not given in the traditional way that they may to a nonprofit, to take that gift and augment it with some additional funds. And so I think we were optimistic, right, but also mindful that we were not going to wrap our entire success into whether or not we saw those numbers climb, but more so that we knew that the nonprofits themselves would benefit from having the platform made available to them, and to bring more visibility to their work, and also just acknowledging all kinds of generosity that was happening around the region. This year as well, we added a new feature where donors could pledge volunteer hours as well to nonprofits. So again, it wasn't about big donations, but and we saw a significant increase in volunteer hours as well. So just kind of giving and generosity all around this year.
That's awesome. Well, I'll say that I thought we would be lucky to hit $6 million. So the fact that we nearly hit $12 million tells me that people are giving. People are giving during the pandemic, and you can ask. I will tell you that I'm on the board of Sacramento Splash, which is an environmental nonprofit for children. Our budget is like $450,000 a year. We raised in 24 hours $111,000. It blew our mind. So people are giving, and they are being generous. Thank you, Neva.
Can I guys make a quick point, Katie, to just on the COVID thing, because I think one of the things that, even though a lot of corporations have the annual timeline of when you submit an application and then when you receive the check, during times like these for COVID, for example, Union Pacific dedicated several millions of dollars to be able to grant projects or provide grants to projects that are specific to COVID-19 efforts. And we just released our first round, whose checks are going to be going on next week. And so just for the nonprofits that are on here now, always keep an eye on those corporations and check on their websites to see if there's any efforts for things like COVID-19 that can help benefit your nonprofits in addition to other.
Excellent. Thanks, Francisco. So Michael, you represent a family foundation that is really different than Union Pacific and the Sacramento Region Community Foundation. So how does that work? And what do you give out?
Okay, so we give a lot less money, obviously, than Francisco. And I will say that when Katie said, "Oh, you're sort of like a catch-all, like don't give money to everything," well, we sort of do give money to everything, and that's sort of what we do, right? So our mission is to promote research and education, social justice, and the arts, and generally to improve the human condition. And that means that we have, well, also because we're a family foundation, I want to be clear, it's not my family.
Yeah,
right?
It's a different family.
Yeah, it's a different family. I just get to work with the assets. We pivot when we need to pivot. And so about half of the money we give out goes to programming that we run ourselves. So we have a center on international education. We have a center on law and aging. And those two centers are sort of premier in the world in those fields. And then the other half of our budget just goes to historically it's gone to what has come over the transom, right? Like unsolicited grants from wherever. And then we, as board members, look through everything and just figure out what we're going to fund. Now, I will say we were in a moment of transition, as of December, where we were going to stop doing unsolicited grants and only do sort of our own focused, solicited work. Because I and the rest of the board are just tired of, there's some board transition, and we have decided that, funding $2,500 or $25,000 to some organization that we haven't really vetted, you know. When the application comes in and you vet it and you really try to dig down in their numbers to figure out what's going on in this place, and you figure out their mission and like what is their actual impact, because people have great mission statements and you know sometimes they have great budgets, and then you actually look down into what their impact is and you're just like, why do I want to give money to you? Because your impact is insignificant compared to what the other next thing I'm looking at is. So
hold on, but do you think, and I'm going to actually have you reconnect to your audio in a second, but
okay.
do you think that in your grant process and solicitation, are people actually showing you their impact? Are they telling you numbers? Are they telling you stories? Are they doing a blend of both? Or do you really, I mean, because I feel like sometimes we're just missing the mark on really showing our impact. You're right, we have great mission statements, we can answer the questions, but when it comes to that measurable impact part, is that where things fall apart for you?
Okay, so can everybody hear me? Can you hear
I
me?
think so, yeah, it's better now. Got to get close.
I don't know if it's my microphone. I bought this fancy new microphone. Here it is. Because I do Zoom like a gazillion hours a day because I teach community college and life is a little weird right now. So I bought this new microphone and well, I don't know if it's good or not. But okay, if you can hear me, to answer Katie's question. I don't know, you better repeat the question, I think.
That's all right. I'm going to come back to it because I'm going to come back about showing impact and like sort of how to best like build that relationship.
Okay.
So, Sarah, will you do the results of our poll? Here we go. So we're higher for corporate foundations, 71% from corporate foundations, 44, 49, 17% have it. Wow, and it's really split half and half about how you're vetting and identifying foundations as well. So 50-50. Okay. So we'll just kind of go back through, and I think I'd like to ask, what's probably one of the best ways that a nonprofit could approach a foundation and make their case to you for funding? I mean, and I know it's going to be different for each one of your foundations, but what's the preference, right? Like just follow our process, I'll contact you, or, you know, do you like more of the warm approach where it's like come and take a tour, build a relationship, and then apply? How do you prefer things? And we'll start with Francisco.
Sure. So you know, my region, I have about 120 plus communities. And so it gets pretty overwhelming when I receive emails from specific nonprofits requesting to share a little more information. And I love to talk to the various nonprofits because I'm involved with nonprofits myself, and it's just kind of where they're coming from. But you know, we typically advise our nonprofit organizations to follow the simple guidelines on our website. They're pretty straightforward. But I do think that the relationship, if you do get a chance to build a relationship with any individual that works for a corporation, that definitely helps. There's been several nonprofits here just in the Sacramento region. I think it's just because I'm based here, it makes it a little easier for me to come out and check those organizations out, where it's resulted in funding. And I think that's a good opportunity for nonprofits. And even, you know, just one example, one of them is just Street Soccer USA, right? We just funded Street Soccer USA with a huge grant here in Sacramento. And that came out of me going to a breakfast and talking to Lisa Reitzman, who kind of manages that program here in Sacramento. And that relationship led into a large grant that they are now benefiting from, and, you know, and the larger Sacramento community. And so I think definitely helps if you do build a relationship. I think not overwhelmed, I think, with emails and calls on a regular basis, because we do have big territories and sometimes that can get a little overwhelming. But we do welcome some of those. And if you see us out in the community, I am more than happy to come check out your nonprofit organization.
Thanks. I also hear that key thing, sort of like, does one of our employees interface with your nonprofit? I see that a lot, right? Like, you know, if I were going after a Target grant or a State Farm grant, trying to find somebody in that network to write a letter of recommendation or support or have volunteered in some way. Yeah. What about for you, Neva? I know that when I was running my nonprofit, it was like, get to the Community Region Foundation, build relationships, get access to their donors and their donor advised funds and whatever you can. And I know that often the community foundation sometimes is like, I'm not your ATM. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not your gateway to all these donors that we've cultivated. So how should we be working with our community region foundations when it's an interesting relationship that's a little different?
Yeah. Well, I will say, and I'll probably contradict myself a few times, but I think for starters, I think initially, if you are unfamiliar with the foundation in your region and you want to, establish a relationship, it does make sense to look on the website and get a sense of what their funding priorities may be initially. We have, for example, a newsletter and grant registry that goes out. So when you sign up, essentially you will get notice of any new grant opportunities that may be coming online, so that you can sort of slowly begin to kind of fold into what the foundation may be doing. So and also as I'm saying that, I think that even though a foundation may not fund in an area, a program area that you may be working in, it is our responsibility to know and understand what's happening in the nonprofit sector. So even, and I think part of doing that is to talk to our potential grantees and partners who are doing the work, and I think that's a unique opportunity for us as staff to inform our donors who may want to fund in areas that we may not be funding at that time. And there's an entire donor manager team and department at most foundations that are well equipped to be able to kind of, you can talk to them and have them kind of understand what your organization is and they work kind of in tandem with our donors who, again, may not know a lot about nonprofits who are working in that area, and really look to the foundation to help guide them in making donations. We also have a really great asset here regionally, which is our Giving Edge database, which also is sort of a clearinghouse for where all nonprofits who want to create a profile on that platform can tell potential donors more about their organization and what they do and their mission. And many donors utilize that as a resource, particularly those who are unfamiliar with some of the work of nonprofits in the region. So that's always a resource that we point our donors to. And so if you are in a region where the Community Foundation has a similar database, you may want to, make sure that you're there and you're visible.
I'm going to pause you right there, Neva, because so as a consultant who goes in and helps nonprofits raise money, I am utterly shocked all the time about their lack of a Guide Star profile. And I know that the Giving Edge for the Community Region Foundation is much like that Guide Star profile, which I think they've turned to another name now. It is important. People do check your Guide Star profile and other search engines to learn about you and get your rating. And so if you don't have, and I call it online real estate, if you don't have online real estate out there, even as a small nonprofit, you really are missing out on those opportunities.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. You would be surprised at how quickly a donor will go. They will do their due diligence. They will look up, your organization, see if you have a website. They'll try to get as much information as they can about you. And I think just in thinking about what the long-term cultivation strategy would need to look like, I think sometimes the assumption is that a big donor always begins as a big donor, and that's not always the case, right? I mean, it takes time, and I know you're going to circle back to this question about how do we how do we tell the impact story. That's a really critical way for someone who's unfamiliar with your organization to understand what you do, and I think that over time, again, you could see that donor become more significantly invested in the work that you do, and that can show up in a number of different ways, not just financial, but certainly that's a way to think about it. So again, I think, as I said, in some ways it makes sense to do your due diligence, do some research on the foundation that you may want to cultivate a relationship, and also seek out opportunities to connect with someone there, and certainly again, where they may not be funding in that area, it's good that they know that you're here, and they can certainly be an advocate for you to donors.
Yeah, one of the questions that came up, Neva, in the chat were really specific to the community foundation, which is, I think, a question you guys get a lot, which is, how can I help a nonprofit tap into donor advised funds? And it's a question I get, you get. I think you just answered it, which is that community foundations can't really make that direct link for you. They can't just say, oh, here's Bob, and Bob gives to environmental orgs. But the foundation needs to be aware of what you're doing, because there may be a conversation one day with Bob, and Bob says, I want to support environmental groups, and they're not going to just give your name. They're going to say, here's the 8 that we know about.
Right.
And here's how you can research them on your own. So it's a lot like that. The other question that came up in the chat that I think relates to what you spoke about too, Neva, was that it says, this was from Catherine Canopy. I find that many foundations are confused by how urban forestry organizations deliver their mission. They don't understand that we work through several programs. So we're often asked, oh, you're a tree organization, or are you environmental education, or are you a youth organization? And so they find themselves having to do a lot of education about what they do, what the urban forest is, what a lot of social equity is in disenfranchised neighborhoods that are suffering from undue, environmental burdens. They're trying to gap that green divide. So it's sort of a robust, rich field. And I think that the message here is that you have to reach out to your community foundation and just really educate them on who you are, even if there's no visible funding opportunity in sight. And that having one conversation doesn't mean, oh, well, now they're my friend and I'll get funding, I'm in. It's a continuous educating.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thanks. So, Michael, what about interfacing with your family foundation? I mean, I know that your application process, or at least when I went through it several million times, it's great because it's 2 pages. It's 2 pages and a budget. Who doesn't love a 2-page grant application? So I know that you're looking at saying we only want to solicit our own grantees that we want to fund, because we can't keep this, onslaught of people coming in the door. So how is it now that you as a family foundation want to be approached? Because I think there's a lot of family foundations out there like that. Like, I can't get to them, and I'm trying to. How do we do that?
Okay, so I'm going to answer that question, but I also want everybody to understand that these are weird times, right? And the great privilege of working at a foundation is that you get to give money out to causes that you believe in. But all the work, like 95% of the work, is on the other side, right? Like figuring out how you manage or get the money that you're going to give out. And, just check out 401k right now, right? Like, if the majority of what foundations are looking at, the majority of foundations, right, are invested in stocks.
They're invested in the market.
They're invested in the market, right?
Yeah.
And so they've taken the same hit that everybody else is taking. Now, in our particular case, we've been pretty good because we haven't been entirely poor. We have other assets, right? But, so the ability to fund is an unknown going forward. Like this next year is an unknown for just about everybody. When I mean just about everybody, I mean everybody. And so, like, what we're looking at, again, what we try to do is, yes, we have things we focus on, but at the end of the day, what we try to do is to lift up people in very desperate need, right? And, you know, I mean, yeah, I want to build buildings, I want to build cool organizations like 916 Inc. and all kinds of other things, right? But if it's just I have to feed people in the streets with every last penny I have, that's what I'm going to do. And so, I mean, this whole conversation is super important because I have to believe that, you know, 12 months from now, things are going to be better. But if you live in the state of California and you're a college professor, as I am, you just got news that, like, okay, all of your classes are going online in the fall. And the reason they're going online is because this pandemic ain't over. And so we're at roughly 30 million unemployed people right now. And I'm calling food bank directors on the phone and asking them, like, what's it look like? And they're saying to me, okay, well, I have access to food that I can bring in, but my distribution stream has changed because most of my distribution stream required, you know, retired elderly people to, you know, at the very edge of distribution provide that service, and they can't do it anymore because they're sheltering in place. Okay? So, like, food banks are completely changing the way they're working. And if anybody in the Sacramento region knows Blake Young, like, he's a super put together human being who runs the Sacramento Food Bank. And what he told me was, like, if what you want to do is to put all your resources into just food, not distribution, just like food, you know, keep your powder dry for 60 days and let's see where we are. Right?
Yeah.
So I mean, we have, and I will say one other thing. My brother is a world-class physician. Like, he's around the world for being a hematologist, oncologist. And when he talks about what's going on in the hospitals, we're in for a long ride, folks. And so, as a philanthropist, right, as somebody who wants to just do good work, and again, I have my own interests, and my foundation pursues our own interests.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, you have to feed the poor.
Yeah.
I have a poor people coming.
So I think that I hear exactly like what you're saying. And I think that that's why this is such a kind of odd and weird, scary time for everyone, period, but also for nonprofits in that, right? Like if you're an arts nonprofit or an environmental education nonprofit, or you're invested in climate change, or, you know, a lot of what our network here is trying to do, like defining what's essential and what's non-essential. And so I think we're going to have to learn great ways to pivot, redesign, redeliver. And I wonder about the role of collaboration. So I know that within the California Relief Network that there were several organizations that received a social equity grant or a green innovations grant, which was to sort of merge how we plant trees and bridge that green divide in disenfranchised communities. And many of them worked with people who were experiencing homelessness to be able to plant trees, care for the urban canopy, and provide workforce development, right? So one of the questions that actually came on the chat was that, well, I'm a small nonprofit. I operate in one city. Can I be more competitive if I were to collaborate and convene with other like-minded entities within a region and then approach a funder? And so I was going to throw that out, especially to like Neva and Francisco that are working with sort of more like huge wide regions. But I also wonder about this pivot question about how environmental organizations, arts organizations who may be deemed non-essential, not that we're saying we are unessential, but that in this time, in this moment, we've shifted. What would it look like to be that? To help those who are going to go hungry, that are going to, you know, be health impacted? I don't know what that looks like, but
I can give it a shot. I mean, you know, for our foundation, for example, we are challenged internally. We have the 3 pillars, and we are challenged internally to split the 3 pillars almost evenly among the amount of funding that we have to be able to distribute in our region, right? So like 25% community spaces, 25% to public safety, 25% to workforce development, and we are able to, you know, move away from that a bit too. But we encourage the small nonprofits to apply. As long as you have a clear program that you are willing, that you want funded with that meets one of the criteria, that meets the criteria or one of the pillars, then it's game, right? I mean, we have nonprofits that apply for $1,000. We have nonprofits that apply for $2,500 and all the way up to $25,000. And I always tell nonprofits, no matter how big or small you are, always aim higher, because we have the ability internally to say we'll dedicate $25,000 to, you know, California Relief, for example. But if we can't provide that funding, then we will grant $15,000, right? But if there's a nonprofit that we believe is really good, that's doing some good work and has good programming, and if you apply for $2,500, we can't then go internally and say, well, we should give them $5,000. So always aim high when it comes to these, and I encourage small nonprofits to give it a shot and apply. And there's certain criteria that we look at as well when it comes to weeding out the nonprofits that we look for. And it's really, you know, demonstrating need for the program or the project, demonstrated capacity of the organization to deliver that quality programming. We don't fund operations, for example. And so I think that's one, a lot of times we get requests or grant from smaller nonprofits to fund the operations or someone's partial salary to help continue that programming. For us, we believe there's a bigger impact to fund the program specific, and then we can have measurable results of how that program is impacting the community locally, right? And I think that's where it's data driven for us in terms of how many people you can impact. And so,
so I that. Yeah, I love what you're saying, which is that one, because you're also talking to impact, right? Like demonstrate your need, demonstrate your capacity that you can fulfill the need, right? And then let's work together and show measurable impact at the end of the day.
Absolutely. And another thing too, whether it's small or bigger grants, demonstrate the financial support from an array of sources, right? We want to make sure that if we fund a project, that we are not, how is that project going to be sustained after UP stops that funding, for example? Because we have a cycle where you apply 3 years consecutively, you're able to get those grants maybe 3 years consecutively. Per year, we consider them individually. After 3 years, you take a break. And then you come back and give other nonprofits an opportunity. But we want to make sure that whatever program you apply for is able to be sustained even after, with or without Union Pacific funding.
I love that you said that, Francisco, because I'm going to laugh so hard. That's the question we all hate to answer.
Yeah.
Just say that.
Yeah.
At every grant, it's like, how are you going to be sustainable after the period? I'm going to apply for more money. So I love what you said. Show who funds you. Show who you apply to. That's really what that question is asking.
Yeah, and if I can jump in on that as well, I think being transparent and sort of realistic with your goals and timeline. And I will say part of that question, the sustainability question, is just as much on us as the foundation, and then to answer than it is on the grantee as well, because again, we know. I can't say that it's all foundations, and more certainly are moving in this direction of giving general operating funds. But I think what has happened, which is totally on us, is that, we are systematically funding programs. And so the idea is that, we've begun to attach certain outcomes to programs, when I think it's not necessarily what needs to happen. So by that, I mean that I think what the question is trying to get is what the sustainability question is really trying to ask is, what is the long-term community impact of this project? And it may be through that program, and it may not be. Right. So you might put up a program, and in that first year, you learn so much about the impact of that program that you may decide to go in a completely different direction, but the outcome still remains. Right. So it's like, how do we pivot away from just funding multi-year programs and lean into the direction of funding long-term outcomes? So I think that's really what the sustainability question should be asking. And then I also will say, and this is kind of top of mind for me, because we just launched a cohort of community partners who are leading the region in just fantastic ways. And part of the sort of the crux for why we're pulling them together is all around this idea of innovation. And what Michael said earlier about sort of this being a very different time, I think now more than ever, it's going to call in the kind of creativity and collaboration and innovation that, we're just not going to be able to sidestep. And one thing that is a sort of a lean startup concept is this whole idea of minimal viable product, right? And that's just the concept behind that, is that, you may have something that you want to test, right? And maybe you may need to test it in sort of a scrappy kind of way. And this might align with what you were saying about, like, how can we maybe forge these new relationships, and will somebody fund that? Would somebody look at that? And for a funder, while they may not be open to funding a $200,000 grant to this new project, they may come in with a $25,000 grant or a $50,000 grant, because it's tangible. And at the end of that, it's sort of a small slice towards a bigger program that you may be developing, or a bigger project that may develop out of this. Or if not, if it doesn't work, it still leaves you nimble enough, and there's flexibility around that funding that could spearhead other kinds of work that might, again, get to that long-term impact. So thinking about where some foundations may come in sort of as a tiny slice, and where some may be more inclined to fund bigger projects, is something to consider, particularly in this time.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah.
I just want to chime in and say that when I started, we did not do brick and mortar. We didn't do salary. Like, if you sent us a grant, it was only like, how is this money going out the door to serve the people? But now it's like, and because Katie and I built an organization together, and I got a good look at what's real about what's going on with the nonprofit. like, you can't do good work without good people. And so if you're not funding the people who are doing the good work, you're not really doing anything at all, right? So you gotta pay the people who are doing the work, right? And there's this notion somehow in the world today that, like, oh, and it's late start right now. Like, who's an essential worker? Who's really an essential worker? Is it the community college professor who gets to teach from home? Or is it the person who's working 3 shifts at the supermarket, right? Like, who's essential, really? And when you begin to think about that, and then you think about, okay, I'm a funder who gives money to organizations that are doing good work. Well, those organizations are built out of people, and they have requirements. And if you really want to fund the work, you gotta fund the people too. And so, just to my fellow funders, I would encourage you to always think about, like, funding not just the project, not just the dream of the thing, but the people who are actually doing the work. And that's just become essential to me.
I think that family foundations are more inclined to provide operational and organizational funding. And one thing that I wish that we would have done, I wish we would have done in 916 Inc., which was the organization that Michael and I founded, was to find a family foundation or a single individual donor. Usually they have their money housed at the community foundations, that will solely fund that executive director's salary. That will solely fund the salary of a program director, period. And then you basically name that position with that foundation name. So had the Albert and Elaine Borchard Foundation funded the executive director's salary at 916 Inc., I would have been the Albert and Elaine Borchard director of 916 Inc. And I think that I've been seeing that sort of circulate around. Another thing that's sort of come up on the chat board is about trust-based philanthropy, and that there's a movement in the Southern California Grantmakers Association, but also a few major foundations in the Bay Area. And so the trust-based philanthropy movement basically is a concept that says that they're doing away with reports. They're doing away with all that stuff, and it's just a phone call. What did you do? What did you learn? So kind of thinking about what you feel all about that. And we have only about 2 to 3 minutes left, and then I want to make sure that we get to any questions. There we go. Anybody real quick? I see Michael going, throw it out the door. Neva, Francisco, what do you guys think about this idea of trust-based philanthropy?
Well, I love the idea. Yeah, hey, do you want to go or I can go?
No, you're good, go ahead.
Okay. Well, I personally I've been sort of following the trust-based philosophy for a while now, and I'm a fan. And I think it's interesting, particularly in times of crisis. Many foundations have actually leaned into trust-based philanthropy, whether they recognize it or not, by relaxing a lot of grant reporting criteria and making the application process really simple to navigate. And quickly deploying, bypassing kind of your sort of protocol and procedure and getting dollars out of the door quickly. And so I think, one of the things that also goes in step with trust-based philanthropy is non-transactional relationship building and partnership with community and foundations. And I think that for program staff who are working in partnership with our nonprofit community, and often serve as a bridge between, again, those who are proximate to the work that we are trying to support through philanthropy. It's really important to even lean into those relationships and deepen those partnerships even more, because we know that there are differences between what's a policy and what's a procedure and what's just a barrier. And I think that's an ongoing iterative conversation that needs to happen, because you're right, if we don't lead with a trust-based value, then get to where we want to go. And I think just quickly, I'll say that, we talked about what should be sort of one of the initial things that you do in understanding whether or not you want to work with a foundation or you're trying to build a relationship. Well, it's not just to make sure that you're mission aligned, but value aligned. Mm-hmm. Because if not, I find that that becomes a tension point at some point in that relationship that will not serve either the foundation or the community partner well at the end.
Thanks, Neva.
I was just going to add that just for us, for UP, after the past 3 years when we went through this whole new structure and way of restructuring our foundation, we didn't have reporting before. And we felt that, I think our leadership felt, and as we talked to a lot of nonprofits that we funded, but that the money that we were granting was not being spent for the project's purpose. And because there was some flexibility there, right, in terms of people were using it for operation. And we wanted to be able to increase our funding at UP to be able to benefit even more nonprofits. So our executive team in Omaha said, well, if we do that, there needs to be a way for us to show at the national level what impact we're having locally. That's data driven. And so if you check out our website, our application process, and it's open now, by the way, this is May 31st. So if you want to apply, just a plug for all of you, please go to our website and apply. But it's really simple. You fill out the application, it's sent to our public affairs directors, we review them, we allocate the funds, we make the recommendations, and then all we ask is a mid-year grant status report of kind of how the funds are being spent. And it's not a big report, it's probably like a 1-2 page status report, just so we have a better understanding. And really, we use that data to be able to, in the future, go back to our executives and say, this is the kind of impact we're making locally. We want more money to be able to benefit even more nonprofit. And so we don't mean to create more work, but at the same time, we use that internally to help even bring more resources locally to show some of the good stuff that we're funding.
So I hear the key is actually to communicate your impact on both sides, right? You can't have a trust-based relationship if you're not constantly sharing your impact and updating your donors and your foundation officers of your good work. And so the mid-year report is sort of the way to do that. And I could see the danger of a trust-based philanthropy process, even though I'm actually all for it, is that so often we're so deep in the trenches of the work, we forget to talk about our impact. We forget to measure it. We forget to spend the time to share the actual story that's impactful and resonant, right? So we have about 2 minutes left. Are there any other dying questions or last comments that anybody wants to make?
Katie, I was wondering if you or any of the panelists could share, like, what's like a first step that people can take? Like, if we're feeling fired up about reaching out to foundations, like, what can we walk away from today and do? Is it find a phone number or email on a website? Like, how do we like start this process?
Well, I think one is definitely doing the research, right, in terms of what the foundation funds. We get many requests for great programs. They don't fall within one of our categories. And no matter how good it is, we just can't fund it because we get so many. So doing some of that research, and then really familiarizing yourself with the public affairs directors or community relations directors, at least for the corporate, on the corporate side. The public affairs directors or managers or whatever position as it relates to public affairs or constituent services are the ones that pretty much manage that grant process locally and regionally because they understand their territory. And so building a really good relationship with, the public affairs director for Rayleigh's and myself and many others, my counterparts and other nonprofits, that would definitely help you find the appropriate contact. Because a lot of times what happens is they'll email the General Union Pacific Foundation email. It gets lost, to be honest with you. And I don't get it until maybe 2-3 weeks later. And by that time, the cycle for the application process may have already ended. And so the best bet is do the research, familiarize yourself with what funding, and then if you're out in the community, meet the public affairs teams of these different corporations that kind of manage those foundations and build that relationship.
I love that last tip. I didn't even I had so many lists at 916 Inc. about relationships I needed to go build. I should have had the public affairs team relationship. It was like I was always looking for the person. Go to public affairs. That's an awesome tip.
Yeah, I'm just gonna triple down on that. Like the way 916 got started was because Katie McCleary walked up to me and said, "Hey, I've got this idea. Do you want to have lunch?"
Mm-hmm.
And that's, who you know is who you know in the world, and that's what privilege is in the most unfortunate and fortunate way, right? Like that's reality.
But I also think there's something really empowering about that.
Oh, for sure.
I got to you through a series of lunches. I just started sharing my passion, sharing my idea, and having lunches with my immediate circle. And someone said, you should meet this guy named Michael. And I was bold enough to say, I don't know him. You are out of my class. I'm just going to say that. It was daunting. Go and have a conversation. And you have to be bold in some ways. It's just a lot of coffees and a lot of talks. It may lead to nowhere, but it grows your social capital. Social capital is everything when you don't have financial capital.
Being able to speak passionately about the work and tell the stories like you were saying this morning, Katie, goes a long way.
And it's free.
Yeah.
Storytelling is free. So, well, I want to thank everybody for being on the panel. Thank you so much for taking your time out today and yet another Zoom call and meeting. I care deeply about the California Relief Network because I've read all their stories and what they've been doing. And it's phenomenal, the intersection of environmental climate change and our disenfranchised communities coming together. So thank you so much. And there's a breakout sessions next about fundraising, and I'll be in one of the rooms and just really want to talk about how fundraising is going for people. So thank you so much for your time today, Francisco, Neva, and Michael.
Thank you. Thank you, Katie.
Thank you.
So we'll be breaking into breakout sessions. We encourage you to turn on your cameras and turn on your mics. You're going to be going into a room again and just engage with a smaller group there. Mariella just sent some questions in the chat for you to talk about what came up for this session, and then also encourage you, this is our last session of the day, so you can connect it back to other things we've talked about today and just what some of your big takeaways are. Do you have something, Amelia?
Just that we are going to gather afterwards. So
yes.
This is the last session, but please come to the end just to express gratitude and answer questions and get your CEUs.
Yes, yes. So we will come back after the breakout, so don't leave us quite yet. And yeah, go ahead and send us off, Eva.